Hello, everyone. This is Lauren Remus. On behalf of America's Job Exchange, thank you for joining us today for hiring and retention practices for individuals with hidden disabilities. Before we get started, I have just a few notes to share. Please use the Q&A feature to submit questions at any time. We're going to plan to address your questions during the presentation as we're able. If we don't get to your question today, you'll receive an answer via email. Just allow us a few days for that response. Thank you. And since we get this one question a lot, we will be emailing a copy of the slides presented and a link to the recording to you in the next few days. Finally, after this event, a short survey will pop up. If you can take a minute to let us know what you thought of today's presentation, we'd really appreciate it. Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce today's fantastic speakers. From Easterseals, Massachusetts, please welcome Jennifer O'Neill, Job Developer, MA, CRC, and Alexandra Ulrich, BSW Program Manager for Transition and Employment Services. Both Jenny and Allie work with individuals with varying disabilities, aiding them in their employment searches and providing job development, training, and support. Thank you, Jenny and Allie, for being here. We're really excited to have you. I'll turn the presentation over to you both.
Thank you so much, Lauren, for that introduction. I'm Jennifer O'Neill, and we are very happy to be here today. Thank you to America's Job Exchange for having us.
And my name is Alexandra Ulrich. Thank you very much, Lauren, for inviting us here today to talk. We're really excited to speak with you all.
And thank you, Jenny and Allie. Take it away.
All right, so just to give you guys a brief overview of what we're going to talk about today, we're going to start with an overview of different types of hidden disabilities and how they might present in the workplace, along with some typical accommodations and some stories firsthand that we've experienced with our clients. Secondly, we're going to talk about why individuals might hide their disabilities and how you as employers can encourage disclosure and encourage people to ask you for accommodations. And finally, we're going to end with ways to ensure that you as the employer are demonstrating unbiased and accessible practices throughout the entire hiring, interviewing, employment, and retention process.
So disability etiquette, we thought that this would be a good place to start because everyone could use a refresher on what disability etiquette is, which is the respectful communication and interaction with people who have disabilities. These might be things you already know in practice, but for others, this isn't something they're necessarily aware of or have been informed of. So to start with, we have the basic definition of what is considered a disability under the ADA, which is a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities, a person who has a history or record of such an impairment, or a person who is perceived by others as having such an impairment. Having an understanding of disability etiquette can help make employees feel more comfortable when interacting with coworkers and supervisors, which can prevent any awkward situations from happening. Good disability etiquette can also expand business opportunities and help organizations serve customers more effectively. That's why we included the phrase sensitivity and awareness towards people with disabilities is not only in the spirit of the ADA, but it makes business sense. The principles of disability etiquette are fairly simple, and here's just a few. Disability does not automatically mean a person needs help or is helpless. Likewise, someone without a physically noticeable disability does not mean that they don't require supports to accomplish tasks in their everyday life. Be sensitive about physical contact. Assistive devices can be considered an extension of the person, like a wheelchair, crutches, or service dog. So always ask permission before touching a person or their assistive equipment. Think before you speak. Rely on common sense to guide your interactions with people and behave in the same courteous and respectful way with individuals with disabilities that you would with anyone else. Try not to make assumptions about others. If you know someone who has a visible or invisible disability, don't assume that you'd understand the needs of all individuals with different disabilities. Be patient. People with disabilities or older adults might require more time to express themselves or to move about. Language definitely matters and is always changing, which includes how we talk about disability. person's disability should not be used to solely identify the person, so it's important to avoid this kind of labeling. Start with person first language, such as person with a disability or person with autism. If you are unsure, it's all right to ask how the individual would like to be referred to as. Some people do prefer to be identified as their disability, so it's always important to ask their preference. Another example of being aware of the language and wording you use could be that it's better to say a person who uses a wheelchair rather than confined to a wheelchair or wheelchair bound. So don't be afraid to ask any questions. Asking questions will help you become more informed and can start important conversations with individuals who have disabilities. And also don't be afraid to say that you don't understand. If you don't understand, be honest and say so, and then work with the person to ensure there's effective communication going on. So disability etiquette in general applies to any individual with a disability, but for this presentation, we will focus on hidden disabilities, which are also known as invisible disabilities. A hidden disability is one that isn't easily visible and immediately apparent. Hidden disabilities can hinder a person's abilities in the world of work, education, and social environments, to name a few. Although the disability creates challenges for the person and can dramatically affect how they perform in everyday life, the nature of the disability makes it difficult for other people to recognize. So the definition is physical, mental, and neurological condition that's not visible from the outside. One is unable to physically see the disability. There are no physical supports present to indicate a disability such as canes, wheelchair, cochlear implant. People with hidden disabilities are often scrutinized by society as appearing able-bodied, meaning they appear typical. A person who seems able-bodied is expected to be able to complete the majority of normal daily tasks. But a person who uses a wheelchair is often perceived as not being able to perform these basic tasks. So both of these perceptions are flawed because everyone with a disability is unique to their own set of challenges and needs, as well as their strengths and abilities. So we all can kind of learn from this and act on this by not criticizing others based on their appearance alone and demonstrate patience with one another. Those who have hidden disabilities have reported being asked questions like, why are you parking in the accessible spot? Why do you get to pre-board? You don't look like you have a disability, when we should actually be considering that, that person is parking in an accessible space with a placard, but they appear to not be using any devices. I wonder if that person actually has an invisible disability. People with hidden disabilities could also experience frustrations of wanting to be seen as a typical individual, but also needing to seek appropriate supports in order to be successful. Those with a hidden disability may experience that sympathetic feeling less often than those with a visible disability. For instance, lifts and ramps are in place for wheelchair users as their limitations are made apparent, whereas those who have sensory impairments may require similar support, such as a private space or avoiding noisy and uncomfortable environments. But regardless of whether or not a disability is visible or invisible, it's important never to invalidate someone's feelings or troubles, as they are equally important. So now we're going to review a few of the major hidden disabilities, describe the main symptoms that could present in the workplace, and suggest some accommodations to address these symptoms and challenges. So traumatic brain injuries, also known as TBI, the symptoms of these can include headaches, dizziness, sensitivity to light, memory issues as well. Accommodations can include allow longer or more frequent work breaks, increase natural lighting, and allow the employee to tape recorded meetings for the sake of their memory. And I am currently working with a client right now who experienced a TBI and is still affected by some of these negative symptoms mentioned, such as memory loss. This client would forget when our next appointment was and would call multiple times to ask. And since working with the client, I've supported them in utilizing a physical calendar where they can write down the dates and times of appointments or interviews. And the client now makes sure to reference this calendar at the beginning of every day to learn what appointments they have as a reminder. So accommodations can be as simple and inexpensive as providing a calendar or agenda book so that person can be successful in keeping appointments and meeting deadlines.
Next, we're going to talk about chronic pain. Some of the main symptom of that is persistent pain lasting weeks or even years. One of the major accommodations is replacing office equipment with more ergonomic equipment, such as adjustable workstations. And if your company doesn't have the knowledge within to do that, there are organizations like Easterseals, among others, that go out and do ergonomic evaluations for employees if that's something needed. Another one would be gastrointestinal disease. Some of the symptoms for that are bloating, abdominal cramps, constipation, diarrhea. And one of the some of the basic accommodations are frequent restroom breaks and the workplace being in close proximity to the restroom for ease of accessing that. I worked with a client previously who actually had both chronic pain and gastrointestinal disease. We were able to get them a job in an office part-time. They were able to have flexibility in when they would take restroom breaks. They were able to have a desk that was close to the restroom. They were able to have an ergonomic evaluation. They also had some other accommodations like being able to have a flexible work schedule. So where they needed to work 4 hours a day, if they had a doctor's office and doctor's appointment in the morning, they could work in the afternoon or vice versa. They could work in the morning if they had an appointment in the afternoon. They were also able to work remotely for days where the pain was so severe that they really couldn't leave the house, but they were still able to get their work done. So there's a lot of ways that these can be addressed that aren't a huge cost to the employer, but still allow the person to thrive. For diabetes, the main symptom is fatigue or lack of energy. Some of the accommodations for that are permission to eat at their personal workspace if that is not otherwise allowed, allowed for storage of medications such as insulin, providing a private area to administer such medications as oftentimes they involve needles, educating coworkers on emergency situation procedures and identification of symptoms of hypoglycemia or hyperglycemia. That can be as simple as if someone is showing these symptoms, you don't necessarily need to call 911, but it might be something as simple as someone recognizing that and bringing them a glass of orange juice or something to eat. I know my mother has diabetes, and at her work, they were able to give her a small refrigerator in which to keep her insulin because otherwise she wouldn't have a cold place to do so. Sometimes you can use a separate room, an office room that isn't otherwise being used. You can provide that to administer their medication. So that worked well for her at her job.
Another category of hidden disabilities would be learning disabilities. Typically, you hear and read information about learning disabilities in regards to students who are in middle school, high school, or college. However, these disabilities don't go away after the student graduates and moves into the workforce. So like the individualized education plans or IEPs, these students were provided in school. They will most likely require support to be successful with their employment. So a learning disability is a neurological disorder that affects the brain's ability to process information. So basically the person's brain is just wired a little differently. Every person with a learning disability is unique and has a different combination and degree of difficulties, and they could be shown through their skills of listening, speaking, reading, writing, or mathematical skills. So examples of types of learning disabilities are dyslexia, auditory processing disorder, and visual processing disorder. And some accommodations that you can use would be allowing the use of a screen reading software, provide a checklist for specific tasks, or even divide large assignments into smaller tasks that have measurement goals. Possibly use flow charts to describe steps of a very complicated process during the workday, and also allow additional training or job coaching. An example of that, I provided job coaching for a person who was working and responsible for organizing files for future audits of the company, and also had data entry responsibilities. And I was present as a job coach to help find ways to help the individual work faster and more efficiently. So I was able to create a guide for how to go through the files in a step-by-step manner that made sense to the individual. So accommodations like on-the-job supports, like job coaching, can be very beneficial for both the employee and the employer, and vendors like Easterseals can provide this service after the individual successfully obtains employment. Another type of hidden disability is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD. According to the National Comorbidity Survey, 4.4% of adults in the United States have been diagnosed with ADHD. However, this number could actually be a lot higher since many cases go undiagnosed or unreported. ADHD is often thought of as a brain-based disorder that affects children, but the latest statistics show a higher lifetime prevalence for the disorder than previously thought. In fact, although the average age of onset for ADHD is around 7, studies show that up to 60% of those kids will exhibit some ADHD symptoms into adulthood. So some of the diagnostic features include distractibility, impulsivity, hyperactivity, and time management and organizational difficulties. So some accommodations that could be provided, provide a quiet office with a door in low traffic areas, allow structured timelines to track important dates and break down assignments. Allie, if you want to read the rest.
Yep. We can allow the use of frequent breaks or walks, and then allowing the use of headphones while on the phone or listening to music. I'm currently working with a client to do some job coaching who has ADHD. They, work at a grocery store currently. And so one of the main accommodations that we have put in place is to provide them with written instructions for what they need to complete throughout the day. Before I was job coaching, they had a lot of struggle with being told to do multiple different things by multiple different managers. And they had a really hard time processing what was the most important to get done, what urgently needed to get done, what could be done for later, and they would bounce from task to task, not really completing any of it. So I have spoken with both the client and their manager, and we're able to get the manager to provide written instructions of what needs to be done and kind of a timeline of when it should be done, how long each task should take, and when it needs to be completed by. And just that little simple extra step on behalf of the manager to really break things down has really helped this client be able to complete tasks and be much more efficient at her job. And so that's another benefit of job coaching, is that we're able to look as job coaches at both what the client needs, but also what the management needs and what the business needs, and to find kind of this common denominator middle ground where it's working for both parties.
All right, so autism spectrum disorder, or ASD. Autism is a broad spectrum disorder, meaning that it affects each individual very differently. So the DSM-5 definition is persistent deficits in social communication and social interaction across multiple contexts. The severity is based on social communication impairments and restricted repetitive patterns of behavior. The strengths for many people with ASD include having a high tolerance and ability to complete repetitive work or tasks, and they thrive in an environment with structure and routine. So some of the diagnostic features also include awkward or lack of eye contact, difficulty understanding someone's tone, their facial expressions, or subtle messages. So here are some things that you can do as a manager, interviewer, coworker, or recruiter when working with a person with ASD. So when talking with a person with ASD, it's important to communicate effectively and directly. This means being direct, saying exactly what you mean, and identifying exactly what you want. The more detail you can provide, the better your employee will understand. And try to avoid complex patterns of indirect speech, like cliches, implied meanings, jokes, or idioms. It's important also to provide clear expectations and guide deadlines. So providing details such as deadlines like timeframes or schedules, as well as outcomes, so what the results should look like, or examples of formatting. use verbal or written words to communicate rather than nonverbal cues. So this means not relying on nonverbal communication to get your message across. For example, if you continue looking at your watch repeatedly during a meeting, that's typically to signal that the meeting is going late or you have another meeting to attend. A person with ASD might not necessarily pick up on this, but they will understand if you verbally convey that the meeting needs to come to a close. Providing detailed guidance and feedback and focusing on behaviors that can be measured. For example, you could tell the person that they need to be completing this many reports by the end of the week, or you need this many phone calls by the end of each shift. By being this clear and specific with measurements, an individual with ASD can be sure they are making their benchmarks and achieving their goals. Some people with ASD report that they have a difficult time understanding if their boss is happy or disappointed with their work performance. So providing constructive feedback will be a way to let them know that they are on the right track, or if there are specific areas of improvement for them to work on.
All right, so now we're going to move along to some different types of psychiatric disabilities. The first one being generalized anxiety disorders. There are a lot of offshoots of this, but we're going to kind of just talk about anxiety in general. The main symptom is just persistent and excessive anxiety or worry, and those people with anxiety often are easily fatigued. Some of the most common accommodations include a flexible schedule, being able to telework, and providing extra time. I worked with a client who was hired by a major national bank to do some behind the scenes work. He did a lot of paperwork and that kind of stuff. Because of his anxiety, when he is learning a new task, it takes him some extra time to process that information because he's also so worried about doing it correctly. As a result, his supervisor took some extra time, went over things multiple times, was able to give him, you know, that extra attention to really learn how to do the task. And since then, he's really excelled in that task and has now learned how to train other people. So taking sometimes that little bit of extra time in the beginning when you're training a new employee can really benefit in the long run, because now, because that client feels confident in their ability and they've learned how to do the work well by just providing that little bit of extra time in the beginning, now they're able to train other people and have become a team leader. So you're really embracing all the positives that the disability can provide. He's really attention detailed oriented, so that's really great. But another one is depression disorders. So again, there's a lot of offshoots of that. Some of the symptoms include decreased energy, persistent feelings of sadness, and the inability to focus on or complete tasks. And some of the major accommodations for that are having a modified workspace, periodic rest breaks, and task separation. I'm currently doing job coaching with a woman who works at a store, or she did until it was closed today, but we'll be back to work in a few weeks. So she works and does a lot of stocking, but there are a lot of different levels to that amount of stocking. So it's putting items back that people put in the wrong place. It's getting new items. You're also getting interrupted by customers asking you questions. And she had a hard time kind of separating these tasks. She would float from task to task, not really completing things. So I was able to go in and do some on-the-job coaching to really help explain to her the different tasks and what needed to be accomplished for each one, and to really break those down. So she didn't feel like it was one big job she was looking at. She was looking at 3 little separate jobs and felt much more manageable. And she was able to really complete it that way. Another thing to keep in mind if you are the supervisor of someone with depression is that they might need a little extra encouragement. They might need help seeing the positive side of things and seeing the good things that they do, because most likely what they're focusing on is the one time they messed up, not the 10 times they did something right. So it's really important to remember as a supervisor to really encourage them and try and tell them the good things that they're doing, which can really decrease their stress levels.
And schizophrenia spectrum disorders. There are multiple versions of this disorder, but schizophrenia in general is a chronic brain disorder that affects less than 1% of the US population. When schizophrenia is active, symptoms can include delusions, hallucinations, trouble with thinking and concentration. However, with treatment, most symptoms of schizophrenia will greatly improve. So to name a few of the symptoms specifically, hallucinations can include hearing voices, which can be very distracting and distressing for the individual experiencing them. Flat affect is when a person's face appears immobile and unresponsive, and the person has a diminished ability to express themselves emotionally. Alosia means the person exhibits brief, empty replies of speech, but this should not be considered as having an unwillingness to speak. And avolition is an inability to initiate and persist in goal-related activities. So some of the accommodations could be developing a workplace plan and accommodation can be a great starting point. A written workplace plan includes the agreed upon accommodations, clear expectations of responsibilities, the consequences of not meeting those performance standards, and the response for when the employee is experiencing symptoms and requires time off for treatment or doctor appointments. It is recommended to create this plan when the employee is not experiencing symptoms. For people with psychiatric disabilities such as schizophrenia, sometimes the appropriate accommodations require the individual and the employer to get creative. So for example, an employer that Easterseals has a good relationship with had accommodated an employee with schizophrenia. The individual was qualified for the sales associate position and was then offered the job, but they demonstrated flat affect when working with customers while on the job. The employer allowed this employee to wear an additional pin under their name tag saying something to the effect of, "Ask me why I'm not smiling," which was a way for them to talk about and educate others and customers on their disability, and then also assure the customer that they were not refusing to smile or show emotion intentionally. So all of these hidden disabilities we just talked about can present challenges in the workplace, but there are reasonable and low-cost accommodations that can solve the majority of these issues. One of the best resources for answering any questions or providing suggestions for accommodations is the Job Accommodation Network, or JAN. If you haven't heard of this resource, I suggest definitely taking a look at their website because it's awesome, and this could be something that your company could utilize in the future. Some of the online tools they provide could be searchable online accommodations resources, a practical guide to reasonable accommodations. There's also a toolkit with a bunch of great resources, and you can actually search through A to Z of disabilities, and it will show you kind of suggested accommodations to use for those. So what is disclosure in the workplace? In order to be able to provide the accommodations previously mentioned and ones you can find on JAN, the applicant or employee needs to disclose that they do have a disability. So this includes informing their employer what their disability is and what challenges or limitations that poses. Obviously, the individual needs to be able to complete the essential functions of the job with or without that reasonable accommodation. And typically the person will be able to offer ideas of what those accommodations might look like. So like I said, JAN is a great website for employers and human resources reps to utilize as a resource. But I also make sure that as a job coach, I provide this resource to my job seekers on my caseload, and just to make sure that they're aware of JAN and they can go on there themselves and find ideas of what to request for accommodations. Now, the individual needs to decide whether or not to disclose, and if so, when they should disclose. They could disclose that they have a disability right off the bat in the application, but for individuals with hidden disabilities, this is typically unlikely. They could also disclose during the course of the interview process, especially if the hidden disability becomes very evident in person or over the phone. I worked with my client who has schizophrenia to try to have them see if disclosing during the interview would be helpful, because they tend to demonstrate flat affect and could come across as not being interested in the job based on their lack of emotion and facial expressions. So we worked on how they could disclose in an honest and professional manner to get the point across and help the interviewer understand how the interviewee was acting behaviorally. And this worked for the client, and after some interviews of perfecting this technique, they were offered a job, and the interviewer appreciated how honest the client had been. Typically, the individual with a hidden disability is more likely to disclose after the job has been offered to them as a way to ensure that they obtain and maintain the position. Once training or orientation has taken place, the new employee might realize there are some aspects of the new position that might require an accommodation in order for them to be successful. This may cause them to then disclose their disability and request specific accommodations based on their experiences during training. Lastly, an employee might wait to disclose their disability until it becomes evident that they do need an accommodation. But by this point, it might be too late and the supervisor might not be happy with the employee's performance, which could lead to certain actions needing to be taken, including termination. So ideally, the person will be able to disclose their disability and request accommodations before their job becomes at stake. So here is a list of the major benefits of disclosure for both the employee and the employer. Access to workplace accommodations. Reasonable accommodations aren't special treatment. Rather, they allow the individual to function and work on an even playing field with everyone else. So once the person discloses their disability, they are entitled to the necessary accommodations. It also gives them the ability to explain behavior to a supervisor or a coworker. This will provide a reason for any behavior exhibited in the workplace that might not be considered typical or normal, such as if a person with ASD does not make eye contact, or a person with diabetes takes frequent breaks to check their blood sugar levels. Ability to explain gaps in employment history. Having a gap or multiple gaps in between previous work experiences usually becomes evident when looking at a candidate's resume or during interview questions. And this can be seen as a negative trait for that candidate. However, during the course of the interview, a person could disclose their disability as a way to provide an honest explanation for why they were not working at those times. Disclosure by a person with a disability can also be used as a form of legal protection from acts of discrimination. It's important to remember that the same protections afforded to employees with visible disabilities also apply to those with hidden disabilities.
So another benefit of disclosure is reduced anxiety and stress from hiding a disability. A lot of clients that we work with are sometimes embarrassed or really have had negative experiences in the past with disclosing their disability. So they're really anxious and stressed out about hiding that. So if they are able to disclose and the reaction is positive, it really lifts that weight of anxiety and stress from their shoulders and allows them to focus more on their job rather than their anxiety. Another benefit is the improvement in self-image through self-advocacy. If someone discloses to you that they have this disability and it's met with positivity and the fact that their disability could be a great asset rather than a negative, it can really help their self-image. By being able to advocate for themselves and see that not everyone views disability as a negative thing. They can also receive increased support from their coworkers, their supervisors, or their social networks. If they don't disclose, their coworkers and supervisors and social networks often don't know and therefore can't support them. If they're really anxious or they're having a hard time with depression, other people may not know and be able to support them around that. There's also the benefit of increased hiring and retention of individuals with disabilities. A lot of clients are scared to disclose. They have faced discrimination in the past. While it's illegal, it still does exist. And if you are able to make someone feel comfortable disclosing to you, they're going to tell their friends with disabilities that you're going to get increased applications. You're going to get people who want to accept your job offers, and people with disabilities are fiercely loyal. They oftentimes have had such negative experiences with other employers that if you encourage them to disclose, you make the process easy and make them feel really comfortable, they're going to stay at your company.
So some disclosure statistics. The National Organization on Disability and the Center for Talent Innovation created a survey for the purpose of filling a research gap. No one had previously measured how many employees identify as having disabilities and the number of these employees who actually self-identify to their employers. The results of this survey found that 30% of employees reported having a disability, but only 3.2% of these people have actually disclosed this information to their employers. The numbers were very similar across identified genders, as well as the employees' generation, such as millennials, baby boomers, and Generation X. But what's really important to note is that 62% of these people surveyed identified as having an invisible or hidden disability. This survey also showed that employees who have disabilities were more likely to disclose to their direct manager or supervisor rather than their team members or coworkers or a person from HR. This makes sense as managers directly work with the individuals and are knowledgeable of the workload and the flexibility and the specifics. So here are some reasons for why a person with a disability may not disclose to their employer. The first is stigmatization or discrimination. This is definitely one of the main reasons for why a person might be hesitant to disclose their disability to their employer. There have been plenty of milestones and improvements in reducing stigma within our society since the passing of the ADA, but we definitely still have a ways to go. Because there's so much emphasis on physical appearance, people with invisible disabilities are often questioned about the authenticity of their impairments or accused of faking their disorder and even exaggerating their symptoms. From the previous survey that I mentioned, 34% of individuals with disabilities reported experiencing some version of discrimination in the workplace. Some forms of discrimination could include workplace harassment from coworkers who found out that the person has a disability, or passing over individuals for a promotion because of their disability. So some employees or applicants might not feel their disability is relevant to their job performance in any way and don't believe it's necessary to disclose. Others report that they don't feel there is an opportune moment to disclose and continue to put it off until they deem the timing is right, which might never actually happen for them. And people with hidden disabilities who decide to disclose have reported lowered expectations from their supervisors, and therefore they don't feel challenged within their position or expected to contribute as much as their coworkers.
Another reason why an individual may not disclose their disability to their employer is feeling isolated from coworkers. There is, as Jenny mentioned, that stigmatization, and if word gets around that someone has a disability, they can become isolated from their coworkers. People may not want to deal with them. They also may not want to receive special treatment, in quotes. And that could look kind of like we said earlier, like someone getting extra breaks or someone being able to work remotely due to their disability. They don't want other people to see them as receiving special treatment. But if people say, oh, why do you get to do this certain thing that everyone else doesn't get to do, then they're left in a tough position where they either have to say, sorry, I don't want to tell you, which is an awkward exchange between coworkers, or they have to disclose their disability and kind of out themselves whether or not they're comfortable to do so. Kind of going hand in hand with the lowered supervisor expectations, sometimes clients have also seen a decrease in their responsibilities. They've disclosed to their employer that they need an accommodation, and instead of providing that accommodation for that maybe particular task in their job, the employer just takes that particular task in their job and gives it to someone else who doesn't need an accommodation. And that's not what the person was asking for. They want to be able to do the job, they just need an accommodation. And then lastly, the increased likelihood of termination. Again, while we'd like to think that discrimination doesn't exist, and while we hope it continues to diminish, it does still exist. I have had clients who have been let go after disclosing, whether it be mental health or other hidden disabilities. And as a result of that, they are terrified to disclose to a new employer.
So how employers can encourage disclosure? By law, employers can't require employees to disclose whether they have a disability, and it's up to them to inquire about accommodations. But still, employers can create an environment where the individual feels comfortable disclosing. So first is practicing disability etiquette, like we talked about in the beginning. This is one way that employers can encourage disclosure through everyday actions and conversations. This can be something all employees are trained in when they are first hired, especially supervisors, since we already discussed how a person with a hidden disability is more likely to disclose to a supervisor rather than anyone else. Disclosure training is something those in HR can participate in and pass on to all supervisors and managers. The Job Accommodation Network, or JAN, has a list of vendors and products that they recommend for this type of training, which you can find on their website. Another way to encourage disclosure is to respond in a positive way to any accommodation requests received. The individual who discloses and then has a positive experience in receiving their accommodations will most likely tell their friends or family that their employer has a reputation for being inclusive and accommodating. Workplace culture, to create an inclusive environment, employers can make sure that their company employee training on inclusion will include educating staff about invisible and visible disabilities. Ensuring that all members of staff understand different disabilities is very important to an inclusive workplace culture. For example, a lack of understanding may lead to, for example, a member of staff making an insulting joke and not realizing the damaging implications of what they've said towards a person who actually has a hidden disability. There are also traits that signal an inclusive leader in the workplace, which can include making sure everyone gets heard, offering actionable feedback, taking advice, empowering team members, making it safe to propose ideas, and sharing credit for team success. And also being open to requests. By law, an employee with a disability is entitled to tell the employer what adjustments they need. However, it can be difficult to implement this if an employee isn't forthcoming with their disability. So to counteract this, you could make it clear that if anybody requires adjustments to their working method or environment, you'll be happy to confidentially discuss the person's disability and how you can best accommodate them. A suggestion could be to include this in your induction for new employees and consider displaying resources for disclosure on employee portals to make this message known.
Yeah, so going kind of just one step further than being open to the requests and what Jenny said of making it accessible to anyone. If someone has disclosed to you that they do have a disability, being proactive and saying, okay, you've disclosed to me, are there accommodations that you need? And even if you put accommodations in place and later you see that same employee struggling, going to that employee again to say, hey, I noticed maybe this isn't going so well. Are there other accommodations we can put in place to really help you? Another thing you can do is to really demonstrate and celebrate awareness. I'm gonna, in the interest of time, kind of combine these 2 points. Demonstrating awareness, including disability awareness in your orientations, including having disability awareness posters, including celebrating things like the anniversary of the ADA every summer. Usually when we're not in pandemic mode, there is a celebration on Boston Common, and I know a lot of other cities have them as well. So celebrating the ADA, celebrating World Mental Health Day, celebrating other specific days specific to other hidden disabilities. Really promoting that to make it seem more like it's part of everyday life and more normal, so that everyone just gets it. You want it to seem like it's part of the fabric, and so people don't feel uncomfortable stepping up and talking to you. And then accepting suggestions or feedback from people with and without disabilities. There may be people that have suggestions based on family or friends that they have. Another positive way to get suggestions or feedback is to make it anonymous, whether it's a suggestion box, anonymous surveys, and that kind of thing. Sometimes that helps people be more comfortable giving their suggestions or feedback.
So accessible practices for employers, how to create and implement inclusive workplace policies and procedures. So the first one we wanted to mention was to utilize inclusive or human-centered design principles in workspaces. So previously, this type of approach was called universal design, but many organizations have started referring to it as inclusive design or human-centered design. This type of workplace could potentially eliminate the need for specialized accommodations and provide a safer and more productive environment for all employees. When an individualized accommodation is needed, inclusive design can provide the employer and employee with a set of key principles and guidelines. So some of these principles could be equitable use. The design doesn't disadvantage or stigmatize any group. Flexibility. The design accommodates a wide range of preferences. Simple, intuitive use. The design is easy to understand regardless of the user's experience, level of knowledge, language, or concentration. And tolerance for error. The design minimizes hazards and the adverse consequences of any accidental or human errors.
Some example questions to ask are, does the office space use alternative lighting options other than fluorescent lights? That could help people with visual processing disorders, autism, seizures. Is there room for people with sensory issues who need a break? Again, that could be someone with autism, someone with a processing disorder, some kind of psychiatric disability. Is there a scent-free workplace and policy in place? I am currently working with a woman who has extreme scent sensitivities and has had a lot of trouble in the past with employers not understanding that and not being able to accommodate. It's actually not considered a reasonable accommodation to ask for a otherwise like workplace that otherwise uses scents to completely be scent free, but you are able to ask for an accommodation to work from home or work in a separate room with a door. But because of the negative experiences and backlash she's faced from other employers, this employee now only wants to work from home. So she has now removed herself from applying to any jobs that would be in a workplace. And that really deprives employers of the skills that she has, but she doesn't feel comfortable asking for that. So if that's already in place in your workplace, you've opened up the door to this whole other population.
Other accessible practices can include examining the application and hiring process. So you can look at, does your company's web pages and job postings on that page meet the needs of individuals who may have motor, sensory, or neurological impairments? So some things that you could do to improve this would be having large graphics that mark hyperlinks so people with fine motor issues can actually activate the link. Organizing your screens and having things be uncluttered for individuals who could be easily distracted and aren't able to locate the information they're looking for. Do your applications have a question asking if the person prefers how they would like to be communicated regarding their application, so by phone or email?
And does your organization practice an accessible interviewing process? Do you let people know ahead of time how the interview will be conducted, whether it's in person, phone calls, Skype, etc.? Each one of these can present its own challenges to someone with a hidden disability. So giving them the heads up ahead of time so they can let you know if they have an accommodation or if one method versus the other would work best for them is in their best interest. Informing the applicant who will be conducting the interview and if there will be any tests involved. That's especially important for people with anxiety. Anything with unknown exacerbates anxiety, and just giving them all the basic facts will greatly help reduce that anxiety. Allowing the interviewee time to think and answer questions. Sometimes people with processing disorders or with autism or with learning disabilities may need 5 to 10 seconds after you stopped asking the question in order to process it and then start responding. One thing that Jenny and I work with a lot of our clients with is to just say to someone, that's a great question. I need a minute to think of my answer, or I need a minute to gather my thoughts. But not everyone has a job coach to tell them that they can ask those things. So just understanding that even if someone pauses for a minute, it might not be that they just don't want to answer you or they're not engaged. It might just be their processing time. And avoid penalizing candidates for not maintaining eye contact or exhibiting flat affect symptoms. As Jenny mentioned earlier, flat affect can occur with people with schizophrenia. It also happens with people with autism, as does not maintaining eye contact. Doesn't mean they don't want the job or they're not excited about the job or they don't want to be there. It's just a symptom of their disability. And it doesn't mean that they won't do a really great job at the job that you're hiring.
Here are some other accessible practices for employers to try and incorporate. Create an accessibility policy and accessibility plan, which can be a publicly available statement regarding the employer's commitment to accessibility. Putting this plan and policy in place can assist an organization in setting actual achievable goals to become more inclusive and diverse. It can strengthen how the employer interacts and provides services to their customers or clients, and can lead to increased revenue. Once this plan is in place, it's important to regularly visit the policy again and continue to update it based on new information or policies. Encourage an ongoing dialogue with employees, like Ali said before, maybe an anonymous suggestion box or a survey to complete online so people can express their concerns or ideas in a safe space. And ensure that there are a group of people monitoring these suggestions and setting time aside to regularly discuss and possibly integrate these suggestions. And promote a diverse workforce. You can ask yourself, are there people with disabilities included on your website, in your marketing, on your portal, either in writing or in photos or pictures? And do all of your company's job applications include an equal employment opportunity statement or disclaimer?
You can also form relationships with organizations that have access directly to the untapped workforce that you're trying to seek out. So we work here at Easterseals, Massachusetts. Easterseals has affiliates in almost every state nationwide, so you can contact your local Easterseals. They can also put you in touch with other disability organizations in your area, or you can simply Google disability organizations in your area, reach out to them and see if they are connected with people who are looking for jobs. Another great place is your local career centers. They have a variety of job seekers with and without disabilities. They also fit into other minority categories sometimes. Career centers are also a great place to post your job postings. Sometimes they'll have career fairs. They're a really great resource free to the community. And another way is to implement and participate in disability awareness and sensitivity trainings. So does your orientation process include training materials related to disability awareness? And even if it does, do you go a step beyond that and try to keep educating your employees? Easterseals, as well as many other disability organizations, will go out to different employers and present about disability awareness, sensitivity training. We've done that with other employers, and I know other organizations do as well. So you can continue to go a little bit beyond and really just make it part of the fabric of your company or organization.
And here's an example of what we at Easterseals did to create a disability-focused resource group, also known as an affinity group or organization. So this is something that we recently started because we felt that we needed to kind of practice what we preach, so to speak. We wanted to examine and make sure that we were doing best practices when it comes to disability awareness. So we recently started this group in June of 2019. It's an employee-led group that's open for all to join. The meetings are kind of determined by the group. Ideally, we would have one every other month. Our mission is an employee-led group that explores, recommends, and advocates for changes to improve the culture surrounding disability awareness, recruitment, and inclusion within our company and with the clients we serve. Some accomplishments of the group so far is that we created the group and our mission statement. In October, we were doing Teach Disability History, which is a movement in the disability community. And we watched The Great Fight for disability rights. This was an office-wide thing, and we allowed the option of zooming in if you couldn't physically be at the office. And we also created an accessibility checklist to make sure that the events and fundraisers we're having are taking place in locations that are accessible, and we're able to provide accommodations to people if they need them at those events. So some of the goals that we've set for ourselves in this group is to educate all staff of the importance of disability history and ensure that all of our events are accessible for all people.
All right, so we do have one question that I saw in the chat. Do you have suggested accommodations for employees with anxiety, depression? Yes, so I do want to say that all accommodations are individualized, and so what works for one person with anxiety or depression or any disability we've talked about today may or may not work for the next person. So it's definitely an interactive process that you want to talk to the employee about. But basic ones that we, I think, mentioned earlier were, extra time with processing new information, being able to, have a remote work area, if that works for you, or a flexible schedule. Oh, sorry, did someone say something? So there are a lot of different accommodations for people with anxiety and depression. If the person who submitted this question would like to speak further in regards to a particular employee that you have or a particular situation, we would be more than happy to do that and provide you some additional information, which leads us kind of to our last slide. I know we're running out of time, so I want to get you guys all this information before we head out. But if you would like to connect with Easterseals to fulfill your hiring needs, we have access to a lot of really incredible candidates that I think would be a benefit to a lot of your companies. And know that we are always looking to give you the best candidate possible. We don't want to just give you any candidate, because if we just give you any candidate and they're not a good fit for your company, you're not going to come back to us. You're not going to want to hire. So we want to give you the best people for the right position. So if you'd like to work with us to fulfill your hiring needs, we'd love to do that. If you have any further questions around people with hidden disabilities or people with disabilities in general, both mine and Jenny's phone numbers and emails are up here. We are working remotely at the moment and would love to help you guys figure out any other questions that you have.
All right. Well, thank you, Allie and Jen, for this great overview, really in depth and a lot of great information. And that brings us to the end of our hour today. So again, thanks to Easterseals Massachusetts for these expert perspectives. Thanks to all of you for attending. I know it's been a rough few weeks, and it will probably continue to be. And we're really happy and glad that you were able to take time out of your day to come and listen to this important subject. We hope you'll join us again for another America's Job Exchange webinar in the future. Have a great rest of your day, and please, everyone, stay safe and healthy. This concludes our webinar.
Thank you all so much for joining.
Thank you.